Okay, sorry about the delay, folks. Bit of a problem with the broadcasting software. Nothing new here. 23rd of April 2015, with a guest, Alan Watt. And I've got a bit of an echo here, but we'll just persevere with it. You there, Alan?
Yes, I'm here, yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, we're going to discuss the fact that we're living in a kind of Brazil movie. Here we are with technical process, and you had technical problems with your phone. We've taken 6 weeks to get a gas stove connected, 3 visits by the gas board, 3 visits from city inspectors, 3 visits from plumbers. You're sitting watching 8 or 9 people, with one person with a spade looking down a hole, and the rest of them just watching, and nothing getting done. They sat on outside on our lawn for the lunch for about an hour. I don't know what they were doing. They were just sitting about doing nothing. But it's incredible. You can't get anything done properly in today's, certainly in the Western society. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, and at least there you can actually physically go to the offices and speak to people.
Yeah.
But here it's all done on the phone. It's all automated, and you can't get to speak to anybody. What's the kind of genesis of all this kind of stuff? Where did this come from?
It came from the big movements that were forming before World War I, and the big groups like the Lord Alfred Milner Group in London that created the Royal Institute of International Affairs and Council on Foreign Relations and Trilaterals and so on. They wanted a world where experts would rule it. That was the problem. And they also believed that to bring in such a world, they would need world wars, they would need high technology. They brought in a whole system which was called Technocracy, in fact, to manage all of this and to train and so on. And they believed to expand all government departments into every aspect of social behaviour and control from education, but also to do with what was called in the early days time and motion, where they'd have experts that would study factories, workers, and how to do things faster, more efficiently, and so on. And they used all of these techniques initially, and what you got out of that was World War I, the biggest slaughter of all, this incredible slaughter, where the technology had certainly advanced, the systems of supply had certainly advanced, and there was no shortage of massive rounds to fire over the battlefields and so on. But they eventually put that whole system into managing society as a whole, and they incorporated a form of collectivism, but everything was to be run by experts, and gradually the whole idea of small business, and I emphasize small business, was to be eliminated altogether. That's still the same today. All the big businesses now are literally that. They're big international corporations. And as they bring in a global system, they've incorporated what they call offsourcing. Many of the jobs that used to be done locally with offices and so on, abroad. I mean, even the US and Canada, your taxes annually are done in India, for those who don't know it. And and the big corporations that they've handed it to are involved in the military-industrial complex, but they actually farm it out over to India, and they do your taxes. But they do the same with the phone systems, and most of the internet systems, and so on. So what happens is you merge the so-called emerging countries or third world countries with the first world countries or ex-first world countries, which we are now. You get this leveling. We come down, they come up to a certain extent, but we're still almost third world. We become third world in how things actually are managed by all these so-called experts and special departments and so on. And we adapt as we go along into it until folk think nothing about spending a week on the phone, like I did, to folk in India. Different ones every day. I had to phone up and ask them what was happening here. And of course they haven't a clue. And I don't know if you've been in India, have you? Have you been over there? Yeah, well, in India, you can wait in a train station sometimes for the trainers to come at 3:30 in the afternoon, and it doesn't appear. And the station manager will come up and he's all smiles and he'll give this long story and so on. But he'll say, I'll be here any time, don't worry. And so come midnight, you're all sleeping on the platform. It might come 3 days later. But I mean, that's how it is in India. And they think nothing of it over there. Well, now you're getting the same system brought over here because they've outsourced all of the so-called customer representation over in India because it's so darn cheap for the big corporations and your governments to farm it out over there. But so you end up falling behind here. I mean, literally, I've had my phone out every year when it rains heavy for the first time after the winter. Something always shorts out somewhere in the lines. The same guy came every year and fixed it, no problem at all the next day. But this time, a whole week went by until eventually they sent out the same guy to fix it. And of course, he phoned me up the very last day, 7 days later, and says, I've done it, I found where the short was. But that's how. So what's the point in even having them in India if they don't know what's even happening? I mean, they don't know what's happening in India, you know. But they'll tell you all these fanciful stories. Each one's very inventive, and that's how they are in India. That's how they talk to their own customers. You know, that's traditional. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you should say that. I've had my own experience, as I'm sure many people in the UK, certainly in the States and Canada. You phone up and you get somebody who, I mean, it's no insult to them, but they can barely speak English and you can barely understand what they're saying. And then and then they've got the kind of, they come back at you and say, I can't understand what you're saying. I mean,
that's why I had the same problem.
Yeah, and it's I've heard you mention before. It's called the age of frustration.
Yes.
And that's the way it is. I mean, I had the same problem in the last house we were in with the internet, and I think it was eight phone calls to the internet company a couple of times every month, just trying to get a cost out of them about what questioning the bill, yeah. And you get the same a different person every time you phone up. You have to go through the whole story again.
Yeah.
And the more phone calls you make, the longer the story gets each time, and you get nowhere. And
minutes all.
And they just send out a bill and it's wrong, and you have to start the whole process again.
That's correct. But now these phones are so screwy because there's less and less people involved in maintaining the systems, actual people. And the first excuse I got from India, no, the second excuse, the second or third day, was that there's a self-monitoring system now in the phone lines to detect faults. And the system that detects faults was causing the problems. That's what they claimed initially. But don't worry, it had fixed itself. I mean, so this computer had fixed itself, you know. And I thought, what? You know, nonsense. I've got a short in the phone line. I've got more experience than you do. You know, I live here. And I had every excuse under the sun. But this fault in the phone line in their supercomputer monitoring system had dialed 911, actually, on the day that it went down, and the police turned up here and asked me if there were any problems. I says, no. I says, any problems with the phone? I says, not so far, but that night the phone was out altogether. So the whole system had been going down, obviously, in my area, or this particular line, and I was giving false calls out and everything else. So, I mean, you can take that scenario with the police turning up, put it into the US system, and they may have had a SWAT team turning up here, you know what I'm saying? And you'd be like the movie Brazil, where they go after the guy Tuttle, they got the name wrong, and the SWAT team comes in and grabs him, and that's the last you ever hear. This guy has disappeared from view, and that's where we're getting to today. The police were awfully nice about it, but they seemed to know something that I didn't, that there was some problems with the lines or something. But yeah, a system that's actually causing the problem, supposedly, wasn't the problem at all, at least maybe one part. The other part was the usual thing. It was corroded connections along the line to the main junction box up in the main road. So that's...
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with this gas line, we had to get the gas in from the main street, which is, you have to get to experts, if you want to use that word, to do that. Mm-hmm. And then, so the meter's sitting outside the wall, and all it takes is to connect a pipe between there and the stove.
Yes.
And we've got Home Depot down here, one of the DIY stores. Now, it's a DIY store. It sells a gas line, but I'm not allowed to buy it because I'm not a licensed contractor. I'm not even allowed to buy the pipe.
That's right.
Never mind fit it. And we get the plumbers come along, give us a quote, overblown as usual. And they've been 3 times because the first 2 times they fixed it incorrectly.
Yes.
And they've got the license. I mean, I could have fitted it incorrectly.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And what difference would that have made? At least I'd save myself a bit of money. But you're not even allowed to do that.
No, and they're getting worse and worse now with all their laws and regulations. The whole idea is to take all independence away from the individual, you understand, and this whole system, this global system we're into. And those who helped design this system back in the 1930s wrote about this. They had a manifesto for it. And they wrote about that, where all power for the individual would be taken away, and every part of his or her life will be managed from birth to death by the experts. So you'll be totally dependent on the system for everything that you need for survival throughout your whole life. That's where we're going right now. In fact, we're pretty well almost there. In fact, if your jet, you get little screw-in jets into these gas stoves, and if they go, and same with the internal thermometer, if it goes, you're not allowed to take the old one out yourself. All you do is unscrew it, and because you can't buy the new one without a license. It's a little screw thing, it's just very simple to put in. So you're not allowed to do it because that'll be breaking the law.
Yeah, my friend Joe, who you're familiar with over in Ireland, he went to a recycling place, and they had these old wash machines, and he wanted to take the drum out to put in the garden to grow some herbs and stop the thing spreading and stuff. And he wanted to dig a hole and put this the drum from the wash machine in. And the guy said to him, "Oh, you can't have that. That's electrical." Mm-hmm. And he said, "I only want the drum." He says, "No, you can't touch that. That's electrical. It's a broken washing machine."
Yeah.
And he can't even touch it. It's not plugged in, nothing.
No.
And I mean, again, you've talked about learned helplessness before, and this comes with the frustration and you needing to go to all these people to get anything done whatsoever. Whether it be changing a washer in your tap. I mean, how ridiculous is it going to get?
Yeah.
But you're right. You'll need about 10 forms to fill in. Probably one to local government, one to some other ministry of this or ministry of that. And again, one's as well for the company that comes out to do it for you. It's going to be ridiculous. Well, it already is actually in a lot of things. You sign this, sign that, sign that. You have no idea what you're signing.
Yeah, well, in Eastern Europe, as it is there, if your form doesn't have a stamp on it, they just turn you away. So you need to come back. You need to go to such and such a place to get the stamp on it. And it can't be a photocopy. It has to be the original one. And it takes a whole day there to just register your car. You go into an office and there's a big long desk, and there's about 6 people sitting at it, and you have to go to each one, or each separate little piece, and then they send you to the bank to pay a tax on it. You have to go to the bank and then come back with the form stamped. Then you have to take that form to the registration place and wait in a queue for 2 hours or something. If you're at the door, the window thing, and the clock strikes lunchtime, forget it. Just shut it, and that's it, and you're gone. You have to wait another 2 hours while they have their lunch or whatever. And then you have to go from there back to the bank to prove you've registered the car, and then you have to go and pay another tax at a different bank, and it takes you the whole day. But if you want a registration plate, it's even worse. It can take weeks. They've got this big long street outside the office where I normally go, and you have to just park your car in the queue and go back every day and see how far down the queue it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about Brazil is like the form filling. It was, it was all about form filling. It wasn't about doing anything. It was keeping the bureaucracy ticking over. It's
to get worse and worse, because the United Nations is the big master for all these umbrella groups to go under, whether it's at the top banking with the IMF and so on. It's all one system that was designed to bring in this complete system, and they have now departments of land inspection. You can't do anything in your home now. All the laws actually do with what you're doing right now with your stove, and that comes from the United Nations, if you don't know that. And it's implemented in the US and Canada and elsewhere. All building codes. And now if you want to even replace a septic tank or something, you've got, again, the same problem. You've got to go and see the Ecological Survey Department. They have to send a guy. You pay for that, naturally. And he'll say, yes, you can replace it, or you can't replace it. And then you pay a big, massive fee. And then they get the engineering department out to see if it's going to fit in the same damn hole, for God's sake, in the same pipes. And it doesn't matter. It's fee, license. And before you're allowed to even go and buy the thing, you can't buy the thing without all these permits and licenses and studies that have been done. And the whole idea eventually puts you off or breaks you financially, and you've got to move into the big city and start renting. That's what they want in Agenda 21, you see. That was planned a long time ago. Yeah.
Well, we're actually living in a kind of, not semi-rural, but it's a city, but it's a small city, and we're kind of off the beaten track a little bit. But it's the city has to come out and do this, that, and the next thing, and even trying to phone them up to actually get a gas installation put in, it took about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get the woman on the phone, and she was supposed to be the sales manager, and I don't know if they get paid a performance, but I can't imagine she was doing much. You can't even get on the phone. But she actually came back 3 or 4 times and kept going on about this propane tank, which I'd never mentioned. I said, well, you need to get that propane tank installed such and such place, blah, blah, blah. I said, I'm talking about mains gas here, not propane. Oh, right, okay, well, they'll need to come out and survey where they want to put the tank. It wasn't even listening to what I was saying.
No, they're not. No. They're like machines themselves, And they treat you like some non-entity. And once you're into that bureaucratic mindset, and corporations have them too, they have their own massive bureaucracies. That's why they intermesh with all governments quite easily. But they behave like machines, and you're nothing. What would you know anyway? To them, you're not. You're beneath a subject even, in their eyes. They don't see you as an equal, and so they don't listen to you at all. And when they screw up your whole life, or maybe weeks or months, they don't care either. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't even dawn on them.
No, so as long as they're all right, Jack, as it were.
Yeah.
I heard the part of the Green Party in the UK's manifesto was that we're going to create 1 million more government jobs. So I mean, that says it all. It's coming from the Green Party. Yeah. I know he said it's going to get so ridiculous that we will be put off doing anything. So, I mean, are we going to see it like the Robert De Niro character in the movie Brazil, where there's going to be vigilante tradesmen, touting for business on the black market kind of thing?
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, if you look at how the Soviet Union was run, everything would have come to a standstill if it wasn't for the black market in the big cities. And there was lots of guys selling gasoline, undercover sort of thing, to try and to keep the economy going and make a fantastic profit. It got so bad in the Soviet Union that towards the end, before they just merged into the West, the trains had to be on the go all the time for efficiency's sake, even if they were carrying nothing. Whole long trains, carrying nothing, as long as the schedule was kept. And the taxi drivers could only do so many kilometers a month in the main cities like Moscow. And once you hit that quota, the guys had to jack up their taxis and turn back the odometers in order to get gasoline, and they couldn't get it. You weren't allowed to get it if you reach your quota for the month. So that's how, to survive, you get a big, massive black market and tradesmen and so on all flourishing.
Yeah, the taxi drivers in Bulgaria certainly don't like turning a meter on, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And you basically get in the taxi there and say, how much is it to go there? And they'll say, well, X amount of money, and you go, come on, and you have to haggle with them, basically, to get the proper fare. But once you speak a bit of the language, you realise that you're no mug, and they'll do it. But they'll try it on anyway, especially at the airport.
Oh yeah.
Even in terms of not just like government bureaucracy. I mean, this is private corporations are just as bad, if not worse.
Yeah.
And they have this. All of them now. We're recording this conversation for quality control. I mean, there is no quality. So there's a lot of control. And I had one instance where I bought something from a store. I think it was a bed, and there was a piece missing of this bed. And I went back. And there was two pieces the same, and there was one that should have been different. So I took the piece back that was the wrong one. And I said, this must have come out of another box, so obviously somebody's going to come back and say this is the wrong piece, So I need to replace it, blah, blah, blah. I went through the whole rigmarole. But I'd phoned them up previously and I'd recorded the call. And I said I was also told that I would get a refund for the fuel that it's cost me to come and get this. Because I've no bed, I have to come and get this piece and get it done because you said it was 2 weeks to deliver it, so I can't wait. And she said, oh, we don't do that. And I said, well, I know you record your phone calls. I said, so do I. And I said, I can guarantee you it was said on the phone if you want to hear it. And immediately, oh, that's no problem, sir.
Yeah.
I mean, as you say, going back to what you said about India, they'll just say anything to get you off the phone, or basically leave you hanging on the phone, listening to that awful music that they play, and you just get fed up, put the phone down. And that's judged as a success, I guess, for them, because they haven't had to do anything.
Exactly, save money.
Yeah, but it's cost you all the money, especially irksome like yourself when you're trying to phone a phone company. You're paying for the call, and then they put that on your bill.
I know. That's right. Yeah.
Well, leaving you hanging on. And all that stuff that they put on at the start of the message. If you want this, press 1. If you want this, and you're on there for 3 or 4 minutes before you actually get anywhere.
Yes.
And you've paid for that, of course, at premium rates normally. So it's just quite bizarre. And as you say, speaking to some of these people, not the ones in India, but just people speaking your own language, there is a total disconnect between what you're trying to get across and what they're trying to get across to you. And as you say, they don't care. But it's more than that. It's ingrained in them just to mess you around.
Well, the thing is too, in big corporations especially, that's what's it's all gone as massive big corporations or chain stores and so on. They are like almost like they have the same mentality as government employees. They're pretty safe in their jobs, and they're guaranteed to work because literally, as monopolies take over and swallow everybody else, there's nothing left but monopolies, and they're guaranteed the turnover and so on because there's nothing else to compete with them. And that's part of the problem. Again, in the old Soviet system, you had that for years in the Soviet system, from the 70s, at least maybe the 60s onwards, where if a relative went into the hospital, you had to bribe the staff to change the linen. You had to even bring the linen in and change the soil linen and so on if your mother was dying or whatever. And you folk had to do that. And everything was bribery. And one of them, in fact, this guy bought the ward's sister. This was in communist Poland at the time. He bought her a refrigerator to make sure that she would tell the staff to take care of his mum. And that's how you do things over there. That's how bad it gets to, because there's no incentive when you're guaranteed work and so on, and you're the only monopoly in the country. There's no incentive to put anything into. There's no competition between staff or anything else to do a good job, and people lose any personal incentive they have because it's so mundane and boring to them. They're guaranteed work. There's nothing behind them pushing them. Everything falls apart in the end. And you see this also when you walk into, say, a Walmart store or a build-all center. Everybody scatters when you walk up to them to try to get a question answered. You see them running away. They don't want to be bothered having to try to find something for you. That's what you found in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was in a DIY store here, and I was trying to find something, and I explained what I wanted, well enough to this guy, and he said, I can't understand you, sir, I'll get this other gentleman. And it was an Indian gentleman who came over eventually, and he understood every word I said. But he didn't even know what it was. I thought, well, hold on, it must be next to such and such thing. And there it was on the shelf. I mean, they don't even have a clue.
They don't, and they also turn over staff so quickly. They don't want to keep them there because they don't want to pay pensions and so on. And so they turn over the staff pretty frequently. So no one gets to know the items. And the younger folk there have no incentive at all. There's nothing to keep them there, or if they can get another dollar at McDonald's, they're going to leave for McDonald's. So they don't know anything about what's where or anything. They have no interest at all in the job that they're doing, so they don't learn anything. Yeah, that's the same as government too, though. Government bureaucracies are the same thing, same way.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to Eastern Europe, it's still kind of common practice over there to get pulled over by the police for no reason whatsoever, and they'll find a reason to say, well, you can pay us this money, or you can go to the police station and you'll be there all day, kind of thing. And that's happened to me on a number of occasions, and fortunately I've only had to actually pay them once when it was pitch black. I was pulled over at the side of the road, and it was actually my own fault because my tax disc was out of date by 2 days, and I just forgot to replace it. But that cost me €10 or something like that. But that's the only time I had to do it. But it was better than going back into Sofia City Centre and spending the night there.
Yeah.
But at least you know where you stand with them. Put it that way.
And they live off bribery too. Those countries, it's quite common to just hand. It's just like Mexico. You just hand the cops a few bucks and that's it.
Well, as I say, at least you know where you stand. But in terms of the UK, America, I mean, I've heard stories about drivers being pulled over down Texas-Mexico border, that area, and getting their cash and that taken off them. I mean, are we going? Is it going to get that bad?
Oh yeah, you understand. Here's the thing that people don't understand at all. The big institutions that ran, I always take for an example that the prime organization, it came to be known as the Royal Institute for International Affairs, a private club of the top bankers in London and the movers and shakers that literally put their own members into politics, into high bureaucratic positions, into the War Office, and so on, and Department of Foreign Relations. So they ran the whole empire. This private club ran the whole empire. They still do. Every top politician in Britain of every party is a member of it. You have to be asked to be a member. You can't just join it. And once you're into it, you keep the same system going regardless of what party name you go under. It doesn't make any difference. That's why nothing changes. And they planned out the whole future of altering culture and so on. They used to, the technocracy means, and it's a system, technocracy, for those who don't know it, of running people from birth to death, expanding bureaucracies like cancers within government, and then interlacing them with private, international, big corporations, until the whole structure is one autonomous unit, basically, private and public. So you've heard about public-private enterprise. This is another slanted term for what they mean by technocratic control of everything, until you as a citizen can't do a damn thing without permission. You'll all have the same brainwashing at school, and I mean brainwashing. They were quite adamant that the technocracy means social engineering, for those who don't know it, with psychologists, behaviorists, and neuroscientists constantly influencing you, either directly through indoctrination, which is another term for education, or through all the information around you, from movies, newscasts, and so on. That's all part of it. Total persuasion and creating consent by the masses. And that's why we go along with everything, and to bring in the seamless system of control worldwide. And that's what the whole globalist free trade idea was about too. Still is. It's one system of interlacing the same system worldwide, creating the big trading blocks. And they were about this in the early 1900s, by the way, the same organization. Big trading blocks, and they wanted one for the whole of the Europe, but they would need world wars, they said, to make it happen, and so they worked fervently for world wars. They financed Hitler, they financed the Bolshevik Revolution, and Anthony Sutton did fantastic work on that, of digging all that up. And you find that every major war and so on, they've been behind and they have financed. But they wanted a United Americas. They came out openly on the Canadian television here under their Canadian branch and the American branch, Council on Foreign Relations. That's the term they use here. And Lloyd Axworthy, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, was now speaking on behalf of the CFR for America, Canada, and Mexico. And he said, we're integrating the whole bloc, and the same as Europe, exactly the same as Europe with the Parliament, And they were to do the same with the Far Pacific region, with the Asian Pacific Rim. And so you have three major trading blocks, and their governments would all become provincial governments, like minor governments under a main government, one for Europe, one for the Americas, one for Eastern Pacific, Far Eastern Pacific region. And then they would be under a global parliamentary system. This is a very old idea, and these guys have worked for well over 100 years to make it happen. And in the process, they would take away all... They claimed that all problems in the world stem from individualism. The individual who might not want to go along with the herd on this particular topic or that topic, or wants to go their own way and be left alone. No, you're not to be allowed to go on your own way and be left alone and make your own decisions. The system is to control every single individual on the planet from birth to death. That's what GIRFEC is about in Scotland, for instance. They've got the same system in England under a different name, another one for America, the US, and so on. And mental health is now brought in a mandatory fashion, where everyone must get monitored from birth on their opinions, their views, and so on, and you get re-educated or readjusted if you have the wrong opinions, even as a 3-year-old child. That's happening now. It's a law now in Britain and Scotland. So you're in a constant training from birth to death to adapt in the proper format, pre-designed format of adaptation that they've laid out for you. and any deviancy from that, and you will be like Tussle or Bustle in the movie Brazil. You'll simply be disappeared if they can't readjust you. We're pretty well there, actually. Yeah.
You know, you started off talking about SWAT teams at your place, and of course that's the first scene in the movie is the SWAT teams coming through his windows and taking him away for a simple spelling mistake on the typewriter because a fly drops in it or something.
It put a B instead of a T or something, or a T instead of a B, but that's it. In other words, you don't count, you see, as an honorary individual. You're irrelevant, yeah. And that is a system, and you understand a lot of it works in a subliminal way, a subconscious way in a sense. Through all the movies and everything else, the messages comes across: you're nothing, you're nothing, you're nothing. You're nobody. The individual is nobody, nobody, nobody. And that does pervade society and trains them that you are nobody. You don't have any rights, really. And you can't have any rights unless you belong to a big group, like an authorized non-governmental organization or pressure group or something. Without that, you're nothing. And that is permeating society, and that's why you see a lot of young folk now with these dead eyes. The fire's gone in them pretty early on. Yeah.
Well, it's funny talking about call centres. Traditionally, it's always been kind of Indian. I mean, I've never actually called up and spoken to a Chinese call centre. I wonder when they'll come along.
No, they actually have apparently one opened up now in the Philippines for the US for one of the phone companies. Because they said they have more of an American type humor, and I guess their accent isn't so bad; it's more understandable. Some of them are trying that, but the bulk of them are in India because they're so cheap, and the big corporations are again. See, the big corporations when they move like Bell Telephone and so on. They get our government subsidies, our tax money helps fund them to set up the projects abroad. Every big corporation that manages us and controls us and profits from us is living on big welfare system, really, corporate welfare, paid for by the taxpayer.
Yeah, I did see a TV program quite a number of years ago on how they trained these guys and women at these call centres, and they were Indian in that example, and they give them all English names. And they teach them to speak in this they try to teach them to speak in this very flat accent instead of kind of allowing them to learn an English accent of their own, which probably makes it harder for them. Mm-hmm. But if they've all to speak with the same accent when they're all from different regions of India for a start and speaking different languages, different dialects. And that's something I noticed. You phone up a call centre and you get some Indian guy or woman on the phone, and they're very pleasant, and you can generally understand what they're saying, and then you'll phone back and get somebody completely different, and they may as well be talking Gujarati because you have no idea what they're saying.
None at all.
Yeah, no. But the Chinese call center. I wondered if, in terms of the cultures of these countries, obviously there's kind of an endemic corruption when you have the caste system and stuff like that. I mean, how long do you think it'll take before they're totally adapted to the Western way?
What they'll adapt to, they're already doing it big time to the Western way with small business. In India they've never been manufacturers. They've always been into small merchandising and so on. And kind of like China in a sense, is one of its biggest exports for a long time now has been people. And we forget that India has one of the largest middle classes in the world. You never think about that because it's got the second largest population on the planet. We all see the poverty in the documentaries and so on, but you don't realise there's also a massive middle class in India, massive, and they have a good education. They generally all flood out, and they have been doing it since about the 50s or 60s into Europe and the West, and so they export lots of people, and so they definitely have a big tie. With Europe, especially Britain now, and they also arrange marriages across the world. They're a very ethnocentric group. Lots of folk in certain countries are very ethnocentric by tradition. But within India itself, with the caste system, you have it's a class system. It's a ingrained caste. It's very hard even to get the lower castes to try and move. I mean, technically it's impossible within India for a lower caste to move up one. It's not allowed. It's taboo. And I don't know if you'll ever break that inside India at all. I really don't know if you will. They've done very good documentaries about India and the caste system. And you'll actually interview people, and some of them, where someone from a lower caste is eventually attacked by some of the Brahmin henchmen for being too uppity or demanding too much, and they cut off their arms and everything. Still to this day, the police don't touch them. It's such a powerful institution. But it's also ingrained in the lower caste too, to sort of mind their place. And I always say that's why the elite of Britain got on so well when they ran India. They had a lot in common with the Brahmin caste system. So I think it'd be very difficult to break that habit. But they're small merchandisers in a sense. They're not so much into managing huge corporations. And it's generally within the families. They'll trade within the families, so they can always get things like linens and so on, and make the garments in a different country by other relatives and so on. That's how they generally operate. But they make very good bureaucrats, by the way. That's why when they're brought into Britain, they often get preferential treatment and put right into bureaucratic positions. And they'll go by the book again. There's no real affinity with the people, the public, the general public beneath them.
Yeah, it's very similar in the Islamic community in where I was at, Luton, where I stayed. I used to go down there and buy the vegetables and stuff from them because they were generally a lot better. But they stuck a Sainsbury's right at the end of a street, which is well known to be the second largest concentration of individually owned businesses in Britain. Yeah. And they were all individual. There was none of the high street shops there, nothing whatsoever apart from this big Sainsbury's stuck at one end of it. And obviously that was an attempt to move in and take some of the business away for these guys and shut some of them down. Mm-hmm. But some of the Asian folk were going in there surprisingly and buying the vegetables off the shelf. I couldn't understand it. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly an attempt to do that. But yeah, I mean, these guys have got their whole system is family orientated, and that's what they do. And
China's the same way. When they move out of China, the family unit is there's nothing. That's it. That's the pinnacle. They obey government because they have to, because they obey power and they're frightened of power. But the family and the extended family is like a clan. It's like a tribe, and it's incredibly strong. And the intermarry amongst it and so on. Wealth moves in between it, and when you get married too, a lot of wealth goes into it. It's big business deals when folk get married. So, yeah, they're very ethnocentric based, and amongst themselves they work awfully well. Yeah.
Yeah, I did hear in Luton that many of the people who owned cars didn't pay insurance or anything like that, and that was kind of just the police just turned a blind eye to it because there was too many powerful people in the community getting too many votes for the local politicians.
Yes.
So that's certainly going on there, and again that's just something they probably brought over from their own culture anyway, where they didn't have car insurance.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. You understand too, this whole idea of multiculturalism is fine in Fairyland and some Disney movie or something. But cultures are different. They're very, very, very different. Their histories are different. Historical systems are completely different too. But those who have the incredibly strong extended family, intermarriage, and so on, as I say, are very ethnocentric. They'll mix with other and work with other of their own kind of groups, even outside their family, but within the same cultural base. But outsiders that they're wary of, and they won't integrate the same way. No, I mean, Chinatowns have been in the Western world now since they were brought over to create the railroads and so on, and that's what they create as Chinatowns, and they still are very ethnocentric based as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that street with the Asian shopkeepers, as you say, they can trade amongst themselves and get whatever they need. There's clothes shops there, there's jewellery, there's food, there's whatever. But they still have to deal with the corporations for their electricity and stuff like that. But I'm sure they're not as frustrated as the ordinary local resident who's been there for 50 years, just trying to get on.
Like we were talking earlier there about this black market. They have their own black market system too, of getting things done. Because they don't go by applying for permits and so on. They have their own guys who'll come in and do certain things as well. And they don't go by the laws of your country. It seems a foreign concept to them to go by laws, because they don't go by their own homeland by laws, and they aren't going to change for years, you know.
Yeah, I did notice there was always a long queue at the ATM machines, but everywhere they went, they paid cash. They didn't use cards to pay for anything. They only took it out the bank, so obviously nobody knows what they were spending it on either.
Well, they don't trust banks either. They've got that right, you know. They do not trust banks. They prefer to have it in hard assets, because they know that banks fail. They've failed in India before in their history. They've been conned in India many times, and they don't trust them at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's all part of the cashless society, the move towards that. I mean, what do you see happening when that kind of takes hold a bit more firmly within these communities where, you know, they've got to use cards and stuff like that? I mean, you mentioned the black market. I mean, it's obviously, it will just get bigger.
Yeah. Well, even in the electronic media, there's already many scams. The Soviets came out with enough. The ex-Soviets came out with a lot of systems of scamming and getting bypassing and still using electronic cash that was not recorded, etc., etc. So these things will really improve, and it'll cost you, of course, to get access to the guys that do it if you want business by them. But see, the big boys who planned this world system, they've never been in an incredible hurry. They have a business plan. When they work out the world in centuries, when you go back into their writings, of how we alter the culture gradually, every generation, until you have this completed. Their 5-year plans, 10, 15, 50-year plans, 100-year plans, and for different aspects of the same system. And they're awfully good. They're pretty well dead on. Right down to even the wars that they say they'll have to do. They have it kind of planned out in a general time period when they want to start them, to take over resources, etc. But as far as the multicultural thing goes, they've been having world meetings on multiculturalism since about the early 30s anyway, with the British Empire groups. I've got some of their old books here from the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the Rockefeller Foundation actually funded the printing of the books because they were part of it for the US and the CFR. And they talked about the timetable of integrating India into Britain and the Western world. And the spokespeople from the 1937 or 38 meeting in Melbourne, Australia, the world meeting, the spokesman from India, members from India, said, when are we be allowed to freely move amongst the empire nations? And the answer came back that it wasn't quite right yet. They hadn't worked on the British public enough yet before they'd accept completely different cultural ethnic groups into Britain yet, but maybe in the 1960s it would be okay to start bringing them in then. So 30 years before they started bringing them in, they discussed it at that one meeting, and probably subsequent ones as well. But so they worked a timetable, and when it comes to accepting them into the culture, lots of propaganda is used naturally, and even through drama and TV and the BBC and so on, until the folks start to accept it, and lots of conditioning at school. And they're given leeway, as you've mentioned already, not to go along with your laws, or to pretend they don't know, understand them, and so on, and they're not fined and charged and so on. And that will go on again for maybe another 20, 30 years, and they hope by that time that they'll have conditioned the offspring enough of these groups to accept the system. So given time, they believe they can achieve anything they want.
Yeah, there's a funny story of a friend of mine up in Norfolk from back in the 70s. There was apparently some African gentleman that committed some burglary or something, or I don't know, an assault or something like that. And it was so rare to have somebody of African origin in Norfolk that they had to find a white guy and blacken up his face to do the reenactment for Crime Watch.
Yes.
I mean, that was in the 70s. So I mean, you know, it's not taken that long to totally immerse the south of England in other cultures. I was talking to, I can't remember if it was Aaron Francis or somebody like that, on the fact that what they've done now with bringing in the Eastern Europeans is there's no distinct group to point at anymore, because the foreigners are from everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can't. I mean, if everybody was from Africa, you'd notice it.
Yeah.
But as it is, I mean, even walking down the streets, that all the shop names are in Polish or whatever in a lot of these places, but it still doesn't register with most people that they're foreigners because they're the same colour as you.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. That's part of it. And again, too, even all of that sections of integration of those countries into this free movement of labour and people and so on across the world. That's part of the free trade agreements. Discussed that copiously on how long it would take different groups to integrate and be accepted by the domestic population until there was no longer a domestic population that would even notice it, because they'd all be such a mix and so on. And they also said that's why they keep incredible statistics. They really run on statistics, these big groups, and of population, how many children are born from the domestic groups and so on. And they actually cheer. It's in the newspapers when they'll say that the immigrant population now is overtaken the domestic population and so on. It's like a big party time. Like, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing that you're now in the demise? And so they want to literally destroy the domestic populations because they know who in the past through revolutions and so on has given them more trouble. And it's been not the guys they're bringing in from abroad, it's the ones that were domestic populations in Europe that caused them most problems down through history. Yeah.
We'll take Poland for example. I mean, there's so many Poles have emigrated to Europe, Western Europe, since they got in the EU. And the problem there now, I mean, we talked about not getting things done in Britain or America or Canada, whatever. But in Poland, the problem's gone way beyond that, where they can't even they've not even got the skilled people there anymore to do the job because they've all left. Yeah. I mean, what's to become of a country like that? I mean, how backward does it have to get before people say enough's enough?
They'll go all the way until it's literally beyond even third world status. They want vast areas to be left alone, and they want the folk off them. Remember, the future of the world system, they're not finished even in America or Britain for that matter. Remember the report put up by the Department of Defence think tank for Britain and the NATO countries. The projections up to the year 2050. It came out in 2008, and I put it up on my website, in fact. And it's 90 pages, and they go through the predictions that they want to create eventually, when they've got all this integration of so on, of the countries flowing, people's back and forth freely, they want to have large vacant areas in the world, and they want to create city-states, like super city-states, and no one will live outside those super city-states, even named quite a few of them that they hoped to create. But you won't have all the cities throughout the US that you have today. And within the next 20, 30 years, they hope to have that all accomplished. And through the regulations of making it impossible to live in rural areas, or even like the suburbs, they'll force folk to move into the inner cities that have to be built upwards and upwards, like China and Hong Kong, until everyone's crammed into these city-states. But vast regions outside that, of expanses of empty land, basically. Then the big super agribusinesses, not small farmers, but super agribusinesses, will be doing all the farming, corporate farming for foodstuffs and so on. But you're not be allowed to live outside on the rural areas unless you're essential to it, and that's the only reason you'll be exempted from it. You must be essential. Your work must be essential. Yeah, that's on Agenda 21 too.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the corporations and the people who are involved in, say the UN, like Rajendra Pachauri, the head of the IPCC. I mean, it's just openly blatant corruption. I mean, this guy is involved in Tata, I think it's car manufacturer, is it? And I can't remember the name of the steel company, but he's involved in all that stuff, shipping out the factories from some from Britain, I believe, went to India. Yes. And as you said earlier, the British taxpayer paid for that, and he rakes in all the profits for it. And yet he's supposed to be the head of the IPCC, going on about global warming. The corruption's just blatant now. They don't even care. Just like the Soviet system.
But you understand, they can't help it. In India, there's no shame in showing how powerfully corrupt you are if you're wealthy. That's a status symbol over there. Remember at one time that was a status symbol in New York City with the gangsters. And again, cultures are very different in how they show wealth and so on. In the British system, for instance, the big top bankers in the city of London that run it for these intergenerational families and so on, are very quiet about it, different way of handling it all. And so they have this era of respectability about them, although it's all a sham and well masked and so on, and well managed to be masked. It's still a sham. But in some of the other countries, they have no problem in showing off incredible wealth, even in times of dire poverty for the rest of them. So Pachuri, for instance, he gets massive grants from the West to the United Nations. And again, he funds his own private projects, even the coal industry and so on, with all our tax money and his private businesses. So it's blatant corruption, yeah. But believe you me, all the rest of them, the big corporations that we know as American created corporations, but they're international companies, they're just as corrupt, but they have the era of respectability to try and hide it, their corruption more so than they do in India.
Yeah, well, they've kind of gone that way in Ireland, from my experience over there, where, you know, if you can get away with something, do it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how corrupt it is, and you're seen as, fair play to you. You know, fair play to you. You got away with that one. You got one over on the man, kind of thing. When of course they're all involved with the man. They've got one over on the people, nobody else.
That's right.
But people can't seem to see it. I don't know. Is it because it's so blatantly obvious that people just think, well, this is normal?
I think people now, and there've been tremendous studies done on the different cultures. In fact, some of the big think tanks that the elite set up and run to study all of us have done incredible studies on all of us, and they'll say things about all of us, like this group or the British group, or that they'd never dare say in public because of the backlash they'd get. But they have us all analysed. And some of the things I've been talking about tonight, they've analysed all of that in greater detail. I've got some of the stuff here from insiders, by the way. It's incredible. And they know that as they destroy what used to be, say, the base morality of the people, the basic system, even if it was a religious system, or even if it was a cultural religious system where they didn't actually believe that much, but they still had the you don't do this and you don't do that because it destroys us, and individuals and so on, and hurts other people. That's all out the window as to get rid of all the religions. In the Soviet system, you see, or the ex-Soviet system, you see that the result of 80 years of abolishing religion and conditioning the children generation after generation to absolutely hate it until you have this completely humanistic idea that if you can do something, get away with it, there's nothing wrong in it at all. In fact, people will worship you. And in a moneyed system where everyone's terrified of being poor, then if you get up there by any means possible, just like the gangsters of New York, then the people will actually admire you because they envy who you've got to. You've had the gall to do it, and you're still alive, and you can show off your wealth and so on. And so you actually admire the crook, you see. You actually admire the crooks. It's a reversal of the old culture. And that's where all the Western culture now is going, thanks to Hollywood and so on, always putting out these movies about the con men and how great they are and so on. People now in an atheistic society will inevitably become more corrupt, and they admire the high winner, the guy who gets to the very top. Don't forget, as I say, that the West has been much better at hiding the start of power structures than most cultures. They've had longer to work at it, and all power starts with a family is big enough to go and slaughter their family next to them until eventually down the road they become king. And then they come up to a system where they're going to create a form of democracy, which is a sham front for the public to believe in, so there's no more revolutions. But they'd always run it behind the scenes, the big powerful families. So you're really looking at gangsterism that's always been hidden, well hidden, but at a time when the public themselves had a religion, or at least human values from religion, that they all shared, even if they didn't believe in it themselves. But they all shared the same cultural values, which kept society, for the mass people, working pretty well. They wouldn't go around killing each other or mugging each other. But you take it all away, and the sky, there's no rules anymore. If you can get to the top by any means possible, and the whole culture's like that, then the one that gets to the top is going to be worshipped by all the rest of the people who haven't got there yet.
Yeah, I mean, using Bulgaria as an example, you mentioned the cities and the countryside and the differences there. In the city, the local city there, people are more inclined to go along with the corruption and, just kind of think, okay, well, whatever. The people in the villages, although they know all the politicians are corrupt, they don't buy the newspapers in the villages. And a lot of that's because they don't have the money, but they know they're all propaganda. They know the police are corrupt. They know the score. If they get stopped, they've got to pay them, and that's the end of it. And you've mentioned many times before that people adapt. We're the most adaptable people, adaptable creatures on earth, kind of thing. And I find that myself. When I'm over there, I have to adapt to that system. Otherwise, you're in serious trouble.
Yeah.
As I said, I mentioned earlier, I had to pay the police that one time. But the consequences of not doing it were going to be far worse.
Yes.
And that's just the way it is.
That's the bottom line. You see, that's the way it is, and you as one guy cannot change it because that is the system. Yeah.
Well, you can't change it on a pitch dark road with two police officers with guns on their hips and you pulled over in the dark.
And they can if you refuse to pay the bribe or whatever, they'll simply have your visa revoked or whatever, and send you home.
I was kind of fortunate. I had a 20 lev note in my pocket and a 50, and I knew that's all I had.
Yeah.
And they were asking for, I think it was 150 lev or something. And I said, look, I've only got 20 lev in my pocket. I need money for fuel to get to where I'm going. And I just stuck my hand in my pocket, and thankfully I brought out the right note, and they were happy enough for that. But that's just the way it is.
You see, here's the thing too. If you're an ordinary person, an average person, and I've done a fair bit of traveling, and even going across Africa, older guys would say, "Oh, you've done this before," and they'd show you a whole bunch of watches. Now they'd buy a whole bunch of watches and have them in both arms before they left, because everywhere you go to show your passports as you cross each little country, that's your bribes, And if you got cash, they're going to take the whole lot off you, and maybe even kill you, and to get rid of you. You are the evidence that they've been robbed. So they kill you, and there's no more evidence. But you also have watches not to bribe your way along. The big boys who run this world have their own private jets, and they just simply travel from their own private airports. They don't have any customs and so on to go through, to other ones that are selected for them abroad in all these other countries. They don't even, you understand, they are a different class. And as Bertrand Russell said, who believed and helped push this whole system and design it, he said there will eventually be a different species. Their reality will be so utterly alien from the rest of the peoples beneath them that they couldn't even relate to one another. We have passed that long ago.
Yeah. Okay, Alan, we've gone slightly over time. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll have you back again next month for another topic and a load of tangents, I guess. Just stay on the line a second, and we'll talk to you after the break.
Sure enough.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, folks.